Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We are back at it again. Ladies and gentlemen, today's podcast episode, an open panel episode, we're going to be focusing on the conversation of gun violence in America. Not only will we be talking about that, especially in regards to like the recent political violence conversation we had last week, especially in regards to Charlie Kirk and the ramifications for there, but there is always going to be the larger conversation that relates to it, and that is gun usage in America, because that's just something that for some reason we can never get on the same page no matter what happens. And it's always, obfuscation. That I didn't say that correctly, but there's always ways to kind of tangent and blame the other side in regards to what took place. So we'll talk about that, the different arguments regarding that, the best usage or in our individual opinions on how to maybe fix or at the very least improve that situation in America, and so much more. With that said, of course, you got yours truly, and we got returning people on the panel here. Of course, we got Drew. What is good, Drew?
Hey man, how's it going?
We got Vivian. Hello, Vivian.
Hello.
And we got Amethysta. How's it going?
Hello, Riddell. Good to see you again.
Yes, sir. So, how we feeling?
You brought it up earlier, Riddell, that what we see here is two sides who want to blame each other, when the real issue is that people are dying. I find that fascinating. I remember when I was a kid, and this goes back a while. There were commercials with Charlton Heston, who was, shilling for the National Rifle Association, right? And he would say, "Guns don't kill people; people kill people."
Mhm.
And there's some logic to that. That you go, well, yes, you have to pick up a gun in order to use it. But certainly the guns have bestowed a responsibility that most humans have proved not capable of bearing. And I think that should be our first step. The first step should be, let's stop pointing fingers that the left is violent or the right is violent, but the people are dying, and we should probably address that fact first. And that guns obviously play a vital role in this.
All right. What do the rest of y'all think?
I very much agree that the loss of life is the biggest problem here, and if we have to, in my opinion, if we have to get rid of guns to save people's lives, then that's something we're going to have to do. I know last week we talked about Charlie Kirk, and he had some pretty divisive opinions about, well, sometimes you got to sacrifice people in the name of defending the Second Amendment. But didn't work out so well for him, and I'm actually of the opinion that Charlie Kirk should be alive right now. So,
What do you think about that sentiment and that quote, Vivian? Guns don't kill people; people kill people.
It's true. I mean, guns are the instrument that people use to inflict death, right? And what Drew said about if it were up to him that we would not have any guns, I don't think that's going to fare too well with a lot of Americans. I think our laws and gun control can be a little more unified and not as laxed. I think the fact that it's varies state by state causes a lot of loopholes and contention within, I guess, people that buy and carry guns. I am under the guise that I think we should have a lot stronger federal gun laws. If we're going to say that it's every American's right to bear arms and it's like a federal, it's a constitutional thing, it's a right for all Americans, why aren't we regulating it fairly amongst all of us?
Yeah, I think it is. It's an easy quote to use, very catchy, and that happens quite often when it comes down to these type of situations, to really stick something into someone's mind. And this quote, in addition to, of course, the Second Amendment, and we'll probably start it right there, is like what they use as a means to, like the gun advocates use as a means to kind of defend their stance. Second Amendment very simply says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's very key, components to this. Probably the biggest one that I hear anytime I'm talking to someone right wing who's not really willing to engage in the conversation we're having is the word shall not be infringed. So when you hear and talk to someone from the right that is not willing to budge regardless of the data, and we'll probably bring that stuff up, or the kind of moral argument that you want to bring up, or just trying to adhere to their empathy, but they just keep on using this line shall not be infringed so to keep their guns. How do you deal with those conversations? How do you engage with those people?
Probably the first question should be, what are arms? A sword's an arm. A club's an arm. We're not saying you can't wield swords, but do you know how much more difficult it would have been for Charlie Kirk to have been assassinated if all we had were swords? Would have been a lot more difficult. Keep and bear arms does not mean that we have to have, peacekeeper missile silos in our backyards. And where does it go? If you go, well, I can have a high-powered, I think it was supposed to be a German long rifle that Tyler Robinson used. If you can have that, what's next? Should be missile silos in our backyard. We need to define what arms is. And that's what Vivian's talking about on a state-by-state basis. We're trying to define what arms are. And we're failing, obviously, because people are still dying.
When it comes down to it, I agree because I've also had the conversation. When you go back to like how they kind of interpreted everything and dove into the creating this or trying to evolve the conversation of the Second Amendment, there are references on how you would have cannons in certain people's yard, and there was the idea that a lot of the things that they would have is obviously to potentially fight against the England from potentially invading again and fighting against international threats, especially considering that a lot of these states were on the coast and there was no unified nation yet. So they had to kind of defend themselves for the most part. So that's kind of where everything derives from. Now we're living a current time when you're diving into or talking to someone about the Second Amendment. And yeah, you could try to define arms. That you're not really going to get anything because they just care about that gun, whether that's their rifle or it's the pistol in their pocket. And the biggest argument they'll use is, well, the two biggest arguments they'll use is this is to protect myself and my family, first argument. And the second argument they'll use is that if the government becomes tyrannical, I have the ability to fight against them. Both of the arguments is used consistently in regards to having a gun. So how do you deal with people who make these arguments? Because these are the popular ones. These are the ones that are constantly used.
Sure. So I would say the Second Amendment part of the Constitution comes down to how do we interpret what it says, right? And that is, generally speaking, something that we leave up to the Supreme Court to determine how this applies to the individuals in the nation. So I would look at landmark cases in front of the Supreme Court, looking at like DC v. Heller, where they did say that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to own a firearm. Absolutely. But they specifically said it was for law-abiding citizens who want to use firearms for lawful means, such as self-defense, and it doesn't protect anyone's right to any particular arm. So just because you have the Second Amendment right to bear arms doesn't mean you can have an AR-15 or even necessarily like a handgun.
You brought up the last clause in the Second Amendment, shall not be infringed. But the second one says, in order to the security of a free state. I forget exactly the wording in that, but it has to do with the security of a free state. How secure was Charlie Kirk? Thank you. Being necessary to the security of a free state. How secure was Charlie Kirk in the midst of this? I mean, it's my opinion, and of course, I'm no expert on constitutional law, but if you read the First Amendment, which starts off, Congress shall make no law abridging or respecting of religion, but then they also talk about freedom of the press. They talk about freedom of to peaceably assemble and go to the government for redress of grievances. And then the Second Amendment comes in, and I think that's important to go, well, redress of grievances. And you even brought up, what if my government comes against me? I don't believe the founding fathers were too concerned about the government coming against us, but rather not redressing grievances. Historically, right, we had the Declaration of Independence in 1776. There was the War for Independence, and then there was a constitution that was ratified 1782. Drew, Vivian, Riddell, I think that's right. The Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. We were 20 years out, 15 years out from the Declaration of Independence. I don't believe that the people who were writing the Second Amendment were worried that they were going to end up where England was. They just spent a tremendous amount of time developing a democratic republic, and there was less concern about whether the government was going to be wrong, or whether the system of government so much being wrong, so much as single people who would not redress grievances of the citizens. I think the Second Amendment is also supposed to indicate that the government is not the law of the land, but the citizens. That the citizens grant power to the government. As Abraham Lincoln makes also very clear in his, the Gettysburg Address as well. I talked myself out. Vivian, aren't you in law? You tell us something else.
I am not in law. I'm in finance, but I co-sign everything that you
Good
just
enough.
mentioned. Very different, very different. But I do co-sign everything that you just said. One of the stats that I was reading when I was researching about mortality rates when it comes to death, it affects the most in the US population, our teens and our kids and our teens. And you definitely see that with the amount of increased mass shootings that we have in schools, and the fact that there's no reform being, at least from what I know, there's no reform that is being drafted to prevent that. Like how there needs to be a lot, just more structure in how people get guns, or like how it's regulated and who has access to them, because our future is dying because of something that is so easily preventable.
Right. Yes, Vivian's right. Children aged 13 to 17, that is the leading cause of death, is gun mortality. More than car accidents, more than illnesses, more than accidental other accidents. It's gun mortality.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we do something about this?
I wish it was that easy. Unfortunately, as I really dive into these type of conversations, that you try to appeal to like the kid aspect of usage. Now, one thing that I do appreciate with some people who actually have like a understanding of how the inappropriate use of guns in the wrong hands could obviously have a misfire and kids could obviously shoot themselves. Or the other aspect is, of course, is unaliving yourself, which is obviously two bad things, of course. And some gun advocates who care about this stuff really preach the idea of like gun safety, utilizing guns properly, locking the guns away to ensure that they are safely kept away from children use. Very understandable things, very important things, of course. With that said, they will still, and this is why I'm kind of harping on this first point, they will still adamantly argue against, obviously, taken their guns away. And no matter the moral argument that is being used, and even the claim that if all the guns were gone, maybe this will be a better place. You can't prove that, but at the very least, you understand the sentiment because it's a tool that can increase the amount of death because of its ease of like violence, right?
But we can
It
look at
doesn't matter.
statistics. We can look at so many other countries that have. England is a great one. The UK is a great one. Do you know how many gun deaths there were in like France in 2024? Zip. There were some, 24,000, I think, in the United States. That's a pretty powerful statistic. I think it's important for somebody to fact check that. But we were like number 3 in the world per capita in gun mortality. I mean, so you had said, Riddell, and forgive me for interrupting you. You had said we cannot prove that regulating guns will result in a less violent society, and I think we can. Vivian's chat fact checked me. What? Help me out.
I don't know if in reality if we can control it, but just from like the stats that I'm seeing, it seems that like we already said the US it has like the highest mortality rates when it comes to teens and children and teens and gun violence compared to like other countries. I'm just waiting for it to pull up here.
While you pull that up, I will say this in regards to what you said is I hear that. The counter argument will be obviously is that these locations that don't have as much gun usage, such as the UK, for example, they do have a violence problem in regards to knives, and that's a big problem over there in terms of their weapon of choice. And I'll be honest, getting stabbed with a knife is definitely not fun, and we all know that. But also the aspect of like the historical context.
Getting shot.
Right.
I don't know. I think about that. I don't know. I think I would rather get shot than getting stabbed with a knife. I'm beyond. I think I'd rather get shot.
That's fair.
But when it comes down to it, the idea will always stem from the origins of the United States of America, and because it's in our Constitution, the comparison will never follow towards what the UK or what other countries are doing because they have it's not embedded in their constitution and embedded into like their way of life. And I'm not saying a society can't work without having guns. I'm saying the United States of America can't work without having guns in particular. So in this kind of country and nation, it's so embedded into our culture and our way of life and our history that it's impossible to imagine something like that. And there's always going to be the sentiment and the worry moving forward and forever is that in a place of peace, what if I don't have the means to protect myself against XYZ? Or what if I don't have the means to protect myself against the government? And that's something they will always go to, even though it's not something that will obviously happen in reality. Hopefully, I don't know. We got a crazy government right now, so we'll see. But that is the big thing in United States in particular. They will use that as a means to say that this is not a true reality.
I think the easiest pushback, right, just to address the two big counter arguments that they would give, right, of self-defense for myself and defense against the government, right? For one, just having a gun in the house raises your chance of dying by a gun injury dramatically, more than any risk of like a home invader, right? It's even more likely that a home invader breaks into your house and uses the gun against you than it is that you are successfully able to use it in defense of yourself.
Right.
Like, you're only increasing your risk by introducing a gun into this situation.
And the fact that you need to use the gun too. Like,
right.
You just have it. Do you know how to use it? Are you willing to harm?
I mean, all the more
people
reason.
Are, right. But most people aren't.
Like, most people can. Like, I don't know if y'all have shot a gun, but it's a daunting thing to do, especially if you're aiming it at somebody.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then to push back against a tyrannical government, right? That's the other counterexample they would give. I mean, look around, right? We're facing a government right now that is willing to say to an individual, you get no due process, no trial under the law. We are going to take you and deport you to a country you've never been to before, just because of, I don't know, we can Photoshop tattoos onto your hands or something, right? We are facing a tyrannical government, and all of these people who are all about the Second Amendment in the face of a tyrannical government, they're cheering on the tyrants. They want this to happen.
Hmm.
So to both of those counterexamples, I would say that's bullshit. Absolutely not.
I mean, I think that's fair to say when you comes down to it. Most people don't know how to fire a gun. They would follow up that we'll just provide them training. That will be the follow up argument in regards to that. We'll make sure that they do know how. And at the end of the day, it's an embedded right. So even if they don't know how, at the very least, they have a means to protect themselves if they can. And it's one of those arguments where it's like it's not 0.1% still gives you a chance to survive. So it is not embedded in anything statistically proven, but it's embedded into something that's like emotionally driven, which is, we know in terms of the average American is more powerful. It's just a more resonating argument for the average American because data it will never be like the go-to when you talk politics with people and the average voter. So in that sense, and in regards to
Yeah.
like the tyrannical government stuff as well, is like, I mean, I'm my podcast. I call a lot of people MAGA fascists and all that stuff. I do think they do bad things. Doesn't mean I obviously advocate for political violence. Nowadays, you got to always say that because they love clipping everything. Um, with that said, though, even in a situation of what we are right now, and let's say like the next administration is an administration full of Democrats, even though they're not going to push back against Trump, they're going to feel vindicated to push back against Democrats. So again, you just won't appeal to them. And then those Republicans who might be the ones that are doing very terrible things, a little authoritarian looking type things, they're going to be the ones, yeah, keep your guns. So they're going to they're going to reinforce this mindset in these people's head. So ultimately, although I understand all your arguments, because truthfully, I do, the practical nature of it is that this will never appeal to them as voters.
Sure, maybe not. I Let's grant for the sake of argument, right, that will never appeal to most people with we need to take the guns away because obviously people are dying and that's bad, right? We can still point to what people are reporting they support, right? So like background checks, mandatory background checks before any purchase of a gun, even if it's like a private sale, not through like a gun store, right? If it's like at a gun show or just between friends, right? Background checks being mandatory across the board. That's only the case in 22 states. That's less than half. It's
Wow.
dramatically gone up in the past decade. I believe in 2015 it was only like 6 states required it. So but like these are common sense things that even like 80 to 90% of gun owning Republicans support. Why is this not universal at the federal level?
That's what I was mentioning earlier, along with the background checks and also like mental health checks. I want to make sure that you're stable enough to carry a gun. And adding to the point that we made before about the US, just the arms of choice is guns, right? I was looking at some stats. Compared to other high gun ownership countries, we are still leading in deaths amongst like homicide, suicide, and accidental for just all gun related, arms related deaths.
Yeah.
Like behind us is Yemen at 5,300 people per like guns per 100 people, and then only six, not only, but the death rate is less than 7% compared to the US being at 12% and of 100 people, 121 of us owns guns. And then
Mhm.
the reasoning behind the higher gun ownerships with like the within our competing countries are like for Switzerland, high gun ownerships are due to militia tradition, but there are strong training and licensing and the culture of safe storage. We don't have that here. And you just grab a gun willy nilly and you store it somewhere where kids are able to grab
Sure.
at any moment that they know where it is. And then another reason for having guns are using for hunting / sport in Finland, but they have very low homicide rates. So it's not just about your access to the gun, but how our like the culture in America, how we perceive what guns are used for.
If I could follow on to that, because what a great statistic. I mean, I had heard that about both about Switzerland and I believe Canada, that even though there are countries that allow ownership of guns, they still have less violent deaths due to them. And I would probably say one of our biggest problems is that we're okay with turning to violence to solve our problems. And this, of course, comes from the highest, our highest office in the land at this point. When people, when you have a government that says, hey, you know what, we're gonna allow people to be violent. In fact, not only should you be violent, it's your constitutional right to go out and be violent, right? I think that's one of our biggest problems. And so now we get back to the pointing fingers, right? It may or may not be about regulating guns. It may or may not about keeping and bearing arms. The real problem is that there are people just going out killing people. If we don't see that in other countries, what's the difference there? What is, you mentioned Switzerland, military traditions and hunting, but there has to be something else. Most of the people I know with guns, and growing up with my family, I know a decent number of them, we're not hunting. They're not going to go out and bag a moose and drag it home they're not going to do that. They're owning them because they're like, well, I work in aerospace and I'm conservative and God damn it, it's my constitutional right to have this huge semi-automatic, whatever the hell this thing is, so that I can go out and shoot tin cans. Okay. So anyway, we should probably address that as well. Why do we think violence is okay? Why do we think the idea of going out and initiating the use of physical force against somebody is moral, is ethical?
Yeah.
I will say that there are 3 aspects that I do think is the big thing to focus on. As for that is kind of going to potentially be embedded into one of them. The physical violence stuff and people kind of committing violence. That one is, I mean, I know people are trying to make it like a big thing. Obviously, it's increasing. The radical rhetoric is increasing. The hyperpolarization in America is increasing. And a lot of these people are obviously just crazy people who are just doing crazy things and radical things. So that
the politicians or the people owning guns? I'm trying to figure out which you mean.
The crazy people who are going out and shooting people that may be a politician
sorry.
or just a random person. But yeah, so there's 3 aspects that you could probably put everything in the lens on, how do we deal with the situation? If we know that we can't tell people that guns are a problem in terms of the ease of use of people to commit violence, because at the end of the day, Second Amendment exists, and regardless of the 2 interpretations, like the interpretation of states having their own militia versus the interpretation of individual rights, the one that America has completely kind of adopted is the second interpretation of each individual person has the right to own a gun. So, okay, that's in our culture. That's embedded into everybody since they're a little kid. Sure. Okay, now let's kind of try to reach out to them and understand, all right, but we don't want these gun deaths to be high. We don't want this rate to be high, as you guys mentioned, continuously. So the 3 lenses to kind of look on how to deal with it is 1, the people, which is that's what you were talking about, Amethyst, in terms of the type of people who are doing the violence. Also, what you were referring to, Vivian, the mental health of the people doing the violence, the conditions on why people are committing the violence. That's one aspect. The second aspect, of course, is increased security, which is the idea of making things more secure to potentially too secure Like obviously adding more security in public schools, adding more security details in public events. And then we'll talk about the pros and cons for all of them. And the last one, of course, is just gun regulation. You have the right to use your gun, but let's create some barriers to ensure that it is used the best way possible. So these are the three lenses. So I guess we'll start with the first lens, since that's the thing that you brought up, Amethyst, in terms of the people, their well-being, their nature, the conditions. And the big one that, again, I'm gonna be the guy that's talking for the right, so to speak. One of the biggest things that they say is we don't need to focus on guns. We just need to fix people's mental health. What do you do when you deal with people who just make that blanket claim?
I'm looking at Drew. You've got something brewing. Go.
You can do both, right? You can say people need mental health, right? Checks, do a check-in, go to a therapist, get help in that regard, right? If you need it, get medicated, right? While at the same time saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't give the people the ability to kill 6 people in 1 second, right? You can say both of these things at the same time. So people who say,
Mhm.
well, like, the problem isn't that we have the capability of killing this many people. The problem is that people are actually doing it. Okay, well, maybe both are a problem, right? You can look at both and say both need to be addressed.
Okay, so in that situation, I think a very fair point. If someone counters that, well, why do I need to address both? If the person was just sane, then I don't have to worry about them killing people. So if we just have all sane people, then this would not be an issue. And I could just keep my gun and use it however I want.
Which goes down a very, very slippery slope.
What
Right?
if,
What
what if
is
I
sane?
Yeah, what's your
right? What if
delineation
I
and
decide that actually
definition?
you're the crazy person that we need to take the gun away from?
Exactly. How about we just
It's too
lock up everybody
subjective.
who's using guns, against each other? That would be something, but
If
I
you don't
mean,
have guns, there's no death. Like, there's also that statement, the counter argument of
right,
that. But
right.
it's our constitutional right to have one. So, where's the regulation?
So I think, Riddell, to answer that in particular, the first lens there, I think we need to take a more holistic view of what mental health is. I mean, why are people depressed? Why are people anxious? Why are these things happening? And if you look more holistically, you can see, I mean, just over the course of my life, it used to be people could buy a home. Now I don't know if Vivian will have the chance to buy a home ever. Sorry, I'm
I have
picking
a
on you
home.
because you look. Damn.
Sorry.
I'm not a homeowner.
But though,
I
okay,
won't. I
but like
might not.
Gen Z, I mean, may never be able to. My son may
Mhm.
never be able to own a home. The disparity, the difference in wealth, just over the course of 50 years, has it's ridiculous. The poor have obviously gotten poorer. The rich have obviously gotten richer. This is why we have people. And the thing is, the richer, the people who are rich, there are many. How am I trying to say this? There are much fewer of them than there are of those who don't have that kind of wealth. And as a result, you've got people who struggle for food, struggle for healthcare, struggle for, am I going to be able to put peanut butter on my bread tomorrow?
Mhm.
That kills mental health. I mean, I was a graduate student once, I'm like, gosh, am I going to have enough top ramen to make it? And I was doing pretty well. I was in graduate school, right? But even that was pretty, disruptive to mental health. If we're going to say, well, we just want to give guns to people who have good mental health, then we need to address the reasons why mental health is bad. And that's because we live in an oligarchy where people are being destroyed by idiots like, people who run Meta, people who run Twitter, or whatever the hell it's called. Sorry to dead name it there, but you seem to do it to your daughter, Elon. Not that I'm bitter about that, apparently. But we need to address why we have poor mental health. Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah, and on that same note, right? It's all the same people who, if they are making this argument, well, let's address mental health instead of gun control, right?
Mhm.
They also don't want to address mental health. They don't want to fund the social services that go into medicating and giving these people therapy.
Great point. Great point.
Right? So it's like they, at the end of the day, they just don't want anyone to touch their guns, if that's the argument they're making.
Yeah, it's a cop-out. Agreed.
It may be a cop-out, but at the end of the day, we got to appeal to them to get votes. And that's just how the current system works. And you got to reach a certain level of like understanding, and you just got to eventually click something into their brain. I do think obviously you're making a lot of really, really good points. Another thing that they would say is, okay, the conditions that create this wealth disparity is a problem. Agree. I think that's a lot of common sense. Some people would not attribute the decline of mental health to necessarily the wealth disparity. They will attribute it to more so the lack of culture, religious values, and in particular the family. The family's deteriorating in America. There's too many one-parent homes. This is a problem. They're not parenting their kids. So therefore, we just need more fathers in their home. We just need more two parents in the home. That's all we need. We don't need to change anything else. And then they need to be either religious or just have established cultural values. What do you say to the people who say that?
God gonna pay my rent? Is God gonna put peanut butter on my bread for my kid? God gonna buy sneakers for him? No. We have two-income households because you have to. Because you can't afford food, you can't afford health care. I mean, it's ridiculous to go, well, just find God. Fine, that's great if God's going to make my mortgage payment, my car payment. Otherwise, it's a ludicrous answer. It's a ridiculous argument that goes nowhere. Ooh, I'm getting heated up here, sorry.
I mean, I completely agree. I think it's insane that people are able to say, okay, yes, I agree you have all of these problems, right? Class is a whole, it's a whole problem that is not going to be addressed apparently, right? So here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to tell you all of my moral values that you just need to adopt. And if you do that, then suddenly all of your problems will disappear.
Right.
It doesn't follow at all.
Right.
I don't think most people have children under the guise of only having a single parent household either.
No.
So I don't. What's the point of making that statement? Like, I would say most people that fall under that category aren't choosing to be a single parent.
Choosing poverty. Nobody chooses poverty.
Yeah. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I very much agree. I think something for people to understand when they kind of look at the aspect of like the individual is that in order to fix these situations, it's far too complex. And I think people think you can create a magic switch and it'll fix it. Understanding the aspect of mental health is very a complex situation. We're still trying to understand it now. And it is multifaceted when it comes down to it. It is condition-based. It's how you're raised. It's the instilled moral values on whether or not they're established, as well as it's, the combination of like social media, environmental and influences as well. So there's so many things that needs to be kind of remedied in terms of the American culture, especially for like the poorer class and the disappearing middle class. But that is so complicated to take care of. So if people do make these arguments, because everything you guys said were correct, you need to make it very clear to these people that there is no one fixed solution to fix these situations. We have to do a lot to kind of fix it. We can have mental health checks. We can have better mental health in these schools. We can have better mental health programs if you guys don't defund it with the big, beautiful bill. But that all takes a lot, in addition to like, obviously parenting and establishing the culture of like, we are having less kids right now. That's a big thing going on in America. You can't force people to have kids, of course. So that's another thing. Social media usage and trying to understand there's too much layers to that. In addition to obviously the political the political rhetoric that is going on, and it's becoming hyper polarized. So it's very easy to tell these people, or it's very straightforward to tell these people, bro, it's too complicated. There's no one trick fix. The best way to deal with it is to make sure that we put enough regulation in check to ensure that the people who are suffering from the conditions don't have guns, or at the very least know how to use guns better. Moving on to the second lens, I guess, would be the aspect of like increased security in the nation. Of course, that is going to be a big thing that I guarantee MAGA is going to try to push with like sending the National Guard certain places, adding more security to political events is going to be a big thing. The aspect of adding more security to schools. So more funding to the police departments, more security overall, all that. These will protect against the other people, because another big argument that people use is the best way to take out someone who has a gun is with a gun. So we just need more guns, more security. What do y'all think about that?
Did you ever learn about the Cold War?
We survived.
I mean, did we? But we didn't fire a shot.
Mhm.
Remember, that was actually won through diplomacy, wasn't it? I
And
mean,
intellect. Yeah.
yeah. An arms race is always that, a race. If you're going to add security to every place on the planet, every supermarket so that you can go and buy your tomatoes, every school so that your kids can go to school safely, it's an arms race. Then somebody else is going to get bigger guns. I mean, here's something that I heard.
Safe though. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Agreed.
But like, because if you think about increasing security in schools, right? I don't want my kid to go to school thinking that they're going through TSA. Are you kidding me? Like, you're supposed to feel safe where you're getting educated.
And they do.
Exactly.
They already
pat
do.
downs, getting everything like confiscated, going through metal detectors. Like, I understand the importance of increased security, but what does that look like?
Right. Here's a horrifying thought, or horrifying something. Let me say it and you'll be horrified. How about that? They were talking to somebody at Evergreen High School. Okay, so this was in Denver, just it was the same day that Charlie Kirk was shot. This happened. The three high schoolers were shot, and then ultimately the shooter turned the gun on himself, and is now gone. But they were interviewing somebody who said the shooter actually walked through the high school for a while. And the reason why there were not more deaths is because they had already been so well trained to handle a school shooter. How horrifying is that we've now trained our children to realize that, hey, look, this is a fact of life, and you'd better know that when you hear a gunshot, you're going to get onto your desk. We're going to lock the door. We're going to stay away from the windows. We're going to stay. I mean, that's the state of our nation. That is security, right? We did use security. We taught the children, listen, you're going to stay alive if you hide from these people. Isn't that the same thing? Would have made a difference if they had somebody with a gun who like ran down the hall a little bit sooner? I don't think so. It's the point is that security isn't going to help. These children are already frightened. They don't have a sense of security. They thought it was completely normal that somebody came and shot up their high school. Somebody said, I can't believe it happened so quickly.
I think we're too focused on being reactive instead of proactive.
Agreed. Security would be a reactive measure.
Mhm.
Got a lot of people with guns, we'll get a lot more people with guns.
Right. I mean, specifically on the case of the Charlie Kirk shooting, right? If instead of there being one shooter, if the whole crowd of people, if they all had guns, right? This is the world that maybe the right-wing, Second Amendment people want to live in. They're like, well, if everyone had guns, then no one would shoot a gun because they know they'd get shot, right? That's the argument they make, right? Okay. So say this shooter raises his gun to shoot Charlie Kirk. Now everyone's shooting each other in this crowd, right? Because either he shoots Charlie Kirk and then that person gets shot, maybe other people get shot, or someone says that person's raising their gun as if to shoot someone. I'm going to shoot him first. And now someone sees, well, you just shot someone first. So I'm going to shoot you. There is no win in this Cold War scenario.
Right.
You, crazy you say that. I do think recently, because after that Charlie Kirk situation, there were so many false alarms at different colleges about a mass shooter, active shooter. And I think either in the Naval Academy or another location, there was a false alarm, and one guy ended up shooting someone else because he thought he was the shooter, even though there
Oh.
was no shooter at all. Don't know if he survived or anything. Didn't look too in depth with that, but I do know that event took place. So yeah, I mean, there's just more chance of tragedy when that situation, especially when these shooters come out, they're not just going to identify themselves. They're going to prepare, they're going to plan, they're going to go like, I'm going to make sure that I can get off what I get to get off so I can become, etched in the history books or prove a message or whatever crazy thing that they have in their head. With that said, unfortunately, I agree. It's unfortunate that we do live in this current situation with we need school, shooter drills. We need that type of, stuff in general. But I'll be honest, I think it's necessary. And I do think it's in this current climate of the United States of America, if that is what you're advocating for in terms of safe gun usage, security. Now, I don't think it should be like, hey, 4 lines, everybody go through the metal detector, get the whole TSA joint on there. There's going to be like 3 cops per class. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's insane. But I do remember back when I was in high school, there was like 2 security guards just roaming around. And not only were they there to, obviously, if something went wrong, they can do something about it, but also just in general situations, they're cool cops. People like to talk with them, and maybe they see some other violent situation, like someone bullying, a fight. They can deal with it there too. So I do think there is a lot of value there in terms of these places, and I think of it like this: if I'm an individual and I send my kid somewhere, and I'm loaded, I'm rich as hell, I got money beyond money beyond money. I'm sending security with my kids all the time. Like if they go to a public event, I'm gonna make sure that there's some people, especially if I know
Right.
my kids are famous. Then I'm like, yeah, they're definitely having security around them. So I don't think security is bad. I do think it can go too far, and I do think it can be problematic once we start creating security states. That's gonna be tyrannical. That's the thing we're fighting against. But
Mhm.
as of right now, I do think security is necessary. I would say.
So just a counterpoint. Tyler Robinson, if I understand, got to the top of a building,
Yep.
knocked off a shot at 200 yards. Would security have helped there? Charlie Kirk was a well-known right-wing extremist. You can be damn sure he probably had some security. I'm pretty confident the college offered him some security. But 200 yards out, are you going to have, 3 cops on every roof kind of thing? I mean, was there not security? Was there not security enough? I guess is maybe the question I want to ask. Um, there are some rifles that can go very long distances, and then if we're going to continue with our Cold War, there are guns that can do laser targeting from space. I mean, how far are we gonna go on that? Are we gonna start now policing every satellite? Did somebody hack into the satellite so that they can't take a pot shot at a politician? I mean, it doesn't end is the thing. Security doesn't end. It can never end.
In a situation like that, it's very tough to kind of deal. Um, but in the example for something like Donald Trump, when there was the assassination attempt on him, I think a lot of people have said very clearly that there should have been better safety measures. You shouldn't have been out in the open where this could potentially happen. You should be in a more controlled environment. So now that we've moved from politicians to political social media creators, now that standard now applies to them, where you got to be more in a controlled environment because the political violence has ramped up.
Mhm.
And it's not about like having enough people, because enough people won't be able to man every single location, but it's just as controlled of an environment as possible so you can, you know, be as safe as possible. 100% safety is impossible, and if we go that far, we're going to become like a police state, and at that point, we won't have any rights. They're already trying to take guns from trans people, so we don't want to do all that.
Mhm.
Can't have gun deaths without guns. Vivian already said that.
Indeed.
100% security is not possible. I don't know. It seems to happen in France and in England. Just
Well,
saying.
yeah, but like those locations, they have different type of deaths, and they have
Sure.
it's a different scenario in general, and just not America. They don't got the Second Amendment. Can't touch it. Can't do anything about it.
I mean,
With that
let's say
said,
we did, though. Let's say we did. Are we going to see a spike in knife deaths that
yes,
even slow, not maybe a little bit, but even slightly compares to the amount of gun deaths we have?
no,
I'm
No,
skeptical,
definitely not.
personally.
but
Right.
the
Right.
practicality of like removing the Second Amendment with our culture is that people will still illegally get guns.
Sure,
But
people are
you
going to break the
could.
law.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
you
you
still
Of
could
can.
in
course.
England.
Yeah.
The
Go,
argument that people
Vivian.
break the rules isn't an argument that we shouldn't have rules in the first place.
No, of course not. But in a situation where we already have more guns than people, then removing it puts a lot of people in danger.
I mean,
Like in order to implement something like this, you would have to completely change the foundations of like gun culture in America from the ground up. And then it could work. But as of right now, it'll be impossible to do that.
sure, but we can still take steps towards that future, right? So, like, if we look at Australia, for example, right, they had a gun culture, not just like America's, but similar in a lot of ways. And the government, instead of just saying we're going to outlaw guns, full stop, they said here's what we're going to do: gun buybacks, where whatever the valuation of your gun is, the government will pay you that much for you to turn your gun in. And the amount of guns available in Australia goes way down, and the risk of shootings, wouldn't you know it, also goes way down. Why can't America do something similar to this? Maybe not on a federal scale, right? But we try it in one state, see if it helps, right? There's no harm in trying something like this.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's the third lens we got to look at: gun regulation in America. Um, Knowing the current situation, it's very complicated to deal with, like how people are operating in this country based off a variety of factors. Even if you add more security, there's a risk of becoming a security state, and it becomes obviously too oppressive, and not enough, and enough security doesn't even exist. You only can do so much to protect people against bad actors. The biggest thing at the end of the day, whether people agree with it or not, that we can do is gun regulation in America. I do think what's important when you kind of adhere to these people when you talk about gun regulation is also being very, very clear in terms of like the good that it can provide. Obviously, this is one of the few times where I feel like data can be very helpful in terms of like what can it do, because we're not taking your guns away. You always got to say that first. We're not taking your guns away. We're just making sure that the bad people don't have it. And obviously, certain states that have gun regulation are much more safe in terms of gun rate than states that don't. And certain states that have open carry and all that stuff, they have worse gun deaths in America. So those are the good times where it's like these are why gun regulations are valuable, just to protect us, So the first one you talked about is the gun buyback program. Um, Amethyst and Vivian, how do you feel about that type of program. And I'm gonna see if we have that. I've heard that. I know what it is. I've heard it being implemented somewhere in America before. I just don't remember where.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
Go
I think
ahead,
it's smart.
Vivian.
I think it's smart. Any type of incentive, especially monetarily in this economy, like I'd rather have eggs in my fridge than than a gun that I may or may not use. So, um, I also think that their gun buybacks is one route to take, and then expanding red flag laws. How certain states have or allow individuals that pose risk to themselves or others to temporarily take their guns back. I know it exists on some, but I think having it exist all throughout the U.S. is, will add some level of regulation. Um, yeah, I mean, Amethyst, do you have anything to say regarding?
Um, the first thought I had was, well, great, then only the oligarchs will be able to afford guns. Because honestly, if we're making a choice between, do I keep my World War II vintage long rifles or do I get eggs? That's not a choice that, well, say Donald Trump needs to make. That was my first thought.
Mhm.
But I'm looking at statistics here, like you do. And I do want to point out too, I want to amend a previous statement I said. I think I said that there were 24,000 deaths in 2024. What I meant was, well, the real number is what I should say here, was 15,000 in 2023. In that same time frame, there were 25 gun mortalities in Australia. So maybe Drew's got a good point here I mean, my initial thought is, well, I don't want just like, Mark Zuckerberg to have a gun. But if it does actually reduce gun deaths, which it appears it does, maybe it's got its credits, its benefits.
I just
So
learned that there is no mandatory licensing and training on federal level for in the U.S.
Mhm.
correct. Yeah, there's not.
What the hell?
A lot of the I agree. I think it should be universal, but they have the states just determine, hey, if you want to do it, sure, whatever. It's quite annoying, I'm not gonna lie. With that said, gun buybacks, I think the interesting thing about that one, and just I did search real quick, shout out Wikipedia, it doesn't always suck, but they are different examples of gun buybacks that have happened in America. Um, and it's interesting that obviously it's not being used more in the 2020s, but there are some examples even in the 2010s where it's been used. So it's definitely been advocated for and implemented in America. And the good thing or the interesting thing about it at the end of the day is you have the choice. You have the choice to give your gun back. And the choice is more money. At the end of the day, people care about money more than guns. Let's be honest, especially people who are poor. You rather have a money, your gun versus money. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to that, but I do think that is a very interesting aspect. We'll see if it could be something that's appealing to people moving forward. Vivian named another one, red flag laws, which is obviously get guns out of bad people's hands, of course, which makes sense as well. And then there's the aspect of background checks and the training aspect as well. Whereas like background checks, they look into you in the system. Now, background checks, there's a lot of states that have background checks, but they don't have background checks for independent buyers. So if you're buying it from like a private owner, they don't have to do background checks and they could just give you a gun. So that is something that is a problem. And some people's counter argument is like, we probably should have some type of like, I don't know if you call it a tracker, more so like something embedded into each gun so you can kind of trace it into the system. I forget the exact terminology from that, but that is something that people advocate for as well. What do you guys think about that idea about like background, all these different gun regulations? And Vivian made up a good point, and now I'm going to ask you guys how you're going to appeal to this to the people for this. how do you appeal to them to make it like more nationwide versus a state to state thing, or even just your state? Just appeal for it in your state, of course.
Can I ask for this? Is just I just want to make a quick comment. You've used the phrase now "bad people" twice. The bad people shouldn't get guns. I want to be careful with that. All three of the shooters that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, the Annunciation Church shooter Robin Westman, the Charlie Kirk shooter Tyler Robinson, and then the person at Evergreen High School in Colorado, all three of them came from religious, conservative families. Supposedly great values, supposedly, mother and father, whatever. What's a bad person? Dangerous people may be a better way to put that. But even then, danger to whom? Danger to the state, danger to the religion, we've got to look again at what mental health means. What is a red flag?
Your sentence just debunked half of something that Riddell said earlier about having a two-parent household, having religion.
I was going to use it earlier and I didn't. We moved on and I was like, damn, what a great statement that would have been.
Religion and a two-parent household was found in all three shooters, yet what's the common denominator? Like, where does that help? How does that help?
Right. I mean, I would say mental health, right? I don't want to say that it's religion. I don't want to say it's right wing. I mean, you can look at statistics and that historically, statistically, right wing religious people seem to be the most violent. If you look at that across, even the last 20 years. So I don't want to say it's that. So how do we do that? What are the red flags? I like the idea of a background check. I mean, full disclosure, I had to go to a psych ward multiple times. I probably wouldn't be able to get a gun anymore. And maybe people would go, oh, thank goddess. Oh my gosh, keep them out of her hands. But how do we make these laws? Yeah, I'm going to stop. Drew, what do you think?
So I think it's a valid concern, right? What counts as a red flag for a lot of reasons, because there's a way of looking at it that says, well, this is if the government just decides that whatever they want is a red flag, they can take whatever they want for any reason,
right?
And that's a fair concern. While at the same time, I think most reasonable people would say there are clear signs for maybe not those three shooters in particular, right? There are clear signs for some people that you would say, I would not trust you to have a gun, right?
And there were clear signs for all three, for what it's worth. Public, obvious,
not their religious or maybe even political backgrounds, but there are signs for most people, right?
But white supremacist comments on Reddit or it should be a red flag to anybody, but just saying.
Yes. Yeah. No. Obviously,
you can't. Yeah, that's a little tough because they'll just speech.
I think it's still a red flag if you say like I want to kill people like on.
Now, if you say a red flag,
right? Sure.
Direct line for violence, yes.
You can have speech that we can get into that conversation another time, but the concern is that there are people who may not exhibit these signs, right? In which case the argument would be, well, we have all of these red flags in place and yet we didn't catch anything, right? This person still committed this horrible atrocity and there was nothing we could do. But on the other hand, think of all the people that were restricted from having these guns. Think about all the atrocities that could have been that weren't, should we implement these laws.
Right.
We won't know until we try something like this how effective it is.
The goal isn't to catch everybody, right? The goal is to restrict majority and be preventative to majority, not everyone, because it's unrealistic to prevent the entirety of the crime itself.
It's a good point.
Very true. When it comes down to it, the easiest identifiers that they've already put in place is like past criminal behavior. It's like, okay, criminal, no guns. very clear distinctions in term from a mental health expert that you're not mentally healthy enough to have a gun. Now they're trying to expand that to trans people with gender dysphoria.
Right.
So that
Right.
one's going to be a little tricky to see how they're going to play that. We'll see because the MAGA wants to put that on the table. But as of right now, that's not a thing. And most people don't believe that is a good thing. So very clear mental inabilities, criminal past behavior, and direct threats of violence are probably the most clear indicators. Beyond that is probably when it gets very tricky.
Sure. But even with those three clear indicators, right, to tie it back into what we talked about before, shall not be infringed, we're already saying, you know what, maybe shall be infringed sometimes on these three very clear
Yeah.
points, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so the shall not be infringed portion of the Second Amendment, even the most staunch Second Amendment people, if they're still reasonable, will say like, okay, there are exceptions.
Yeah, I mean they've established that they'll say that those people one's a criminal, so they're not really an American anymore. They'll
No,
kind of
they're still
detach themselves.
they still get their constitutional rights and a lot of other regards, but Second Amendment maybe not, right? Like
Yeah, so
yeah, just
that's
being a
the big thing
criminal
that they can
isn't
do
enough.
because criminal is an exception. So it's an anomaly. It has a very few there has certain rights that can be taken away from you the moment you become a criminal, especially depending on the criminal. So that's their easy out for them to kind of go like, oh, it's a criminal. And then the other
Well,
ones and inciting
convicted, convicted of a
convicted
felony.
criminal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You can
Yeah.
commit
I
a
mean,
crime and not
it's
get convicted, as we've
yeah.
seen
I mean,
by our
there's
current commander in chief,
right.
Yeah.
But
who
he's
Oh,
still a
on a lot
criminal.
of things is also convicted, I might add.
sure. But regardless, that when it comes down to it, the easy out is that idea of them being a criminal.
Sure.
So the semantics in itself can only be applied based off the case in case scenario. As for the other aspects, is inciting violence. That's also something that's very easily that they can go defend against. Even there's exceptions in like every single amendment in regards to that one. And then the other one, what did I say? The mental health one. I mean, that's just the aspect of like being like a rational, normal state of mind of human being. The mental health thing will always be complicated, but that one, I feel like these are so clear in their head that you won't be able to apply that to attack the Second Amendment.
Likely not. I mean, and just, and I'm a little unsure on this. Maybe somebody wants to fact check this. My understanding is that Tyler Robinson's long rifle was a gift from his father. The high school student at Evergreen High School was 16, could not own a gun, at least in Colorado, and used their father's gun for this. Which, by the way, it turns out is also a felony to that minors were able to access this person's
Mhm.
firearms. So the parents are
Very
kind of going through
responsible.
a oh crap moment right now. But so that's 2 out of 3 in the last 2 weeks. That even if we had in place this idea that you have to pass a background check, it wouldn't have prevented either of the two, specifically Charlie Kirk's death, which I think is
That is
what
also getting litigated, which is going to be another aspect is parent culpability in
was
terms of
right.
that has been there was a recent case that happened in regards to that where the kid shot up and they were looking at the parents like how responsible are you?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'll pose that question to y'all. How much responsibility should parents have when it comes to like 16, even 18-year-olds in their home specifically committing violence?
If they're above the age of 18, none. That's what we say in the United States. Tyler Robinson was 22, I believe. Robin Westman was in his 20s, in their 20s. These are adults. Not to mention, I will say, right, this was a great Mormon couple, a great Mormon tithing the temple couple. This is, Tyler Robinson's parents. I
If
don't
you're
know.
using your parents' firearm, I think they have a lot of responsibility in that.
Yes.
And also, why do civilians need like high risk firearms? Like I understand if we want like firearms for like a revolver, or I'm not too familiar with like types of guns, but like a gun to protect yourself and your family. But people have access to assault weapons. Why? Why is that like just out willy-nilly in the streets? I think if the instrument used for killing is supplied by the parent, then you're fully responsible. And what values are you instilling in your kid that is allowing them to think this violence is okay? And you as a parent, there's parental intuition.
That's the bigger point. Because I mean, if you buy your kid a car and your kid gets in a car accident and somebody dies, are the parents responsible for giving the kid a car?
That's
I
fair.
don't know. I mean,
That's
I'm not trying to tear down your argument, but
Obviously, the
yeah,
difference would
what did
be
you treat?
intended instrument, the instrument of travel versus the instrument of violence.
Sure.
I mean, that's the biggest way you can distinguish it, because kids having a guns, I mean, what are you going to use that for? The kid.
Oh, agreed.
Hunting, shooting tin cans. There are all of these other things that people use these guns for. That's the argument, right? We aren't using this
Right.
gun for violent actions. This is a means of leisure, of recreation.
But the
That
act
happens to
of
be used
shooting
for
a gun is a
Right.
violent action.
It happens to be used for all of these horrible atrocities that they're not going to address.
Yeah, but in the situation where a kid will use it, which would have to be the scenario from every understanding that I have, and I'm just providing their counter arguments. I've already debated a lot about gun regulation, but their counter argument would be very simply that the kids, the only way they can use this in a hunting scenario or shooting cans is legally supposed to be in a controlled environment with an adult around. And in any situation where they have the guns individually and using it, that is not okay in any scenario. So that would probably be the biggest thing, because kids at the end of the day, they're not seen as having the maturity of being able to make self-aware decisions. Like the extreme cases, if they do like some gruesome, terrible act, and even those circumstances, people are like, should we still try them as an adult? So that's gonna be the big distinguishing factor there.
I actually need to step out. I do want to say thank you both to Drew and Vivian, and to you, Riddell. Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully this was of at all value. Thank you.
I
No, I
really
think
appreciated your contributions personally.
Always.
Thanks.
always for
good to
sure.
see you.
Yep. See ya.
You have a good one.
You too.
So when it comes down to this conversation, and we'll talk about some few more things, and we'll start wrapping things up. It's really important to really understand their mindset, which is why I've been providing their counter arguments this entire time, to see like how do we really reach to them and appeal to them, because ultimately all these things that we talked about in terms of these gun regulations, they should be reasonable to them, but sometimes it doesn't click to them. We gotta go like, okay, but like all these other things, you gotta have the whole catalog of things and break down. This is why this is not good. This is all the complicated scenario, all that stuff. And to kind of touch upon the assault weapon thing, which is another thing that has been talked about, assault weapon bans. Their counter argument typically is like, one, they say handguns kill people more than assault weapons, and then two, they say, how do you define an assault weapon? Two arguments I hate, because they're like, these are not good arguments, but this is what they use it for. And typically, from my understanding, like, you are not supposed to. Some states are weird, but you're not supposed to have assault weapons in a lot of public environments. You're not supposed to, in the very least. So that's the biggest thing when they use this counter argument. It's like, well, handguns kill people more anyway, and I need this for hunting. And what is even an assault weapon? Can you define it? Is it automatic, semi-automatic? Like, what's an assault weapon? How would you guys deal with these type of arguments?
Let's see what the definition of assault weapon is. Under the federal assault weapons ban expired in 04, a semi-automatic rifle, pistol, or shotgun was classified as an assault weapon if met specific features: detachable magazine, and two or more of the following: folding or telescoping stock, pistol grip, bayonet mount, flash suppressor, grenade launcher.
Yeah. What were you about to say something, Drew?
I mean, the government can define it in however many different ways they want, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be something for maybe the Supreme Court or Congress to write down to get whatever wording they can pass through laws, right? I don't know that the argument needs to be over what the terminology of like assault weapon is. Like this feels like we're arguing over semantics at that point. For me, I think the distinction is non-existent between an assault weapon and a non-assault weapon. It
It's
a gun
really
is a
more
gun.
so the
But-
difference between the semi-automatic versus the automatic.
Sure, those have existing definitions and differences, right? I admit that.
That's what they would use as their arguments, like, "Oh, you ban our semi-automatic, but I can use automatic, right?"
And my response would be no, you cannot. Like I
think there is a
understand this
difference, though.
concern that people are going to not be convinced if you go too far with gun regulations. I agree. We do have a gun culture. It's going to be like you're going to get a lot of pushback. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like any of these right-wing gun-toting arguments hold up under scrutiny. I don't think if we hold the values consistently, this we don't want people to die, what can we do to try and save lives? Implement background checks, address mental health, keep the guns out of people with red flags, whatever those are, do gun buybacks. If we do all of these things, which on principle, it feels like the right-wing people also who value people continuing to live, it feels like they should agree to all of these things. I think I'm going to butcher the quote because there's a quote from James Randi, who's famous for like debunking people who are like using pseudoscientific claims. He's a famous skeptic. He said, "You can't convince an unrational person using rationality." So if people believe something, not based on statistics or evidence, just because they feel it, you're never going to be able to win that argument by appealing to things like statistics and evidence.
You were saying something, Vivian?
I was mentioning the point of like handguns versus semi-automatic and fully automatic rifles, right? The shots per second, the lethality of a handgun versus like assault rifle, like it's tenfold. So why are we allowing access, like regular civilians, to essentially have the ability to kill 10 to 20 people per second versus just a revolver, which is one shot per second, or like a semi-automatic handgun, which is 2 to 4. We might not be able to like eliminate it, but we can decrease fatalities and casualties by what's available.
Yeah, ultimately, even if I provide their counter argument, I think it's so bad. I think there's really no justification for assault weapons.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, there's no scenario where you would need it. And if someone sees you with an assault weapon, like obviously, one, they're gonna think, "What the fuck?" And two, if they're a crazy, insane lunatic mass shooter, they're gonna turn the other way. It's like, I mean, I'm just gonna go shoot up this other area. So this in the entire situation for that is like it doesn't really hit for me, especially if you really want to have a gun on your hip, you having a handgun, which is easier to conceal, which is one important aspect for the safety of everybody involved, as well as it's easier to use in a situation, as well as it would be you know I I would say safer because there is potential ramifications in terms of like kickback and all that stuff. But regardless, yeah, I don't think there's a good argument for assault weapons. As for what you said, Drew, I agree because I make a lot of content. I talk about politics, obviously, which is why I created this platform. And sometimes in my comment section when I'm roasting MAGA or the far left, to be honest, mostly MAGA, I don't engage with certain people in my comments because like there's no point. No matter what I will say, I'm not going to reach them. That's fair. But I do think I kind of separate social media. If I'm having a conversation for you, then I at the very least have to make the attempt. And it's not something that I want to do, but the difference in that quote versus in difference of that quote, whatever context that he was using it, because you said he was talking about like pseudoscientists, so I can kind of imagine a little different scenarios. At the very least, in the context that we're talking about, is like it has dire ramifications if people are voting the wrong way. So, unfortunately, you have to appeal to people. Now, the people you typically have to appeal to are not insane. They're normal, average Americans who just want a better country and want to keep their rights.
Mhm.
But there are just certain issues that even the average American's like, that's probably not a good idea. I probably don't want you to take my gun away. You know, I'm not the biggest gun advocate, but like taking guns is probably crazy because they've been embedded into the Second Amendment culture. So you just gotta make the other arguments, just appeal, like just better gun regulation, create a better environment, other stuff like that. To kind of wrap things up when it comes down to this conversation, because I do think it was important to really kind of go through all the different ways we should be talking about gun violence in America. Ultimately, when it comes down to moving forward, when you know that the idea of banning guns is probably not going to work, but you want to appeal to the average voter, how, in your opinion, do you think is the best way to, at the very least, connect with them and help understand your opinion in terms of like toning down the gun violence in America um, as of right now?
I mean, we're not looking to abolish guns and not letting citizens have guns, but just to make sure that it's safer for everybody that owns a gun or is around a gun, to keep our environment safer, or to decrease the statistics of kid to teen gun mortality rates, and just to make sure that we as a society are regulating the ability and the ability to have a gun. We're not saying that we just want to create a safer country for everybody, right? So whatever that looks like in terms of more stricter regulations, I think that would be the how, at least how I would approach the humility appeal to people that are opposing, um have opposing views, not to completely abolish, but just making sure that everywhere like every aspect of this country is a little safer with having guns around, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I think, like I said, if this person isn't listening to any of the other arguments we're making, right, you can still appeal to the common goal of we want to save people's lives. We don't want people dying
Mhm.
to these gun deaths. We can make the emotional appeal in that way. We can soothe their fears. Say we're not trying to take away all of your guns. Like that's not what the goal is, right? Our goal is to make sure that these tragedies, because everyone that's worth having this conversation with anyway agrees that these shootings are tragedies, whether it's in a high school or at a political commentator. We all think it's unfortunate. So as long as we can agree on that, asking them what they think we should do about it,
Mhm.
we can try and bridge the gap. At the end of the day, this is going to have to come down to usually one-on-one conversations where maybe you can change someone's mind slowly over time, give them something to think about, and maybe influence their vote. That's the main goal.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Yeah, ultimately, there gun usage, you know, I'm not a hater of guns. I do think people over romanticize it for some weird reason. They infantilize it. They're like in love with guns to a cringe degree. Um, Obviously, I shot a gun before. Well, people who know my podcast, I've shot a gun before because I was in the military. So obviously, I had to get like rifle training, all that good stuff. Um, so knowing to how to use it is proper, of course. Knowing how to use it safely is proper. One thing that is undeniable in America is that it is embedded in our culture. The Second Amendment is a standard that will never go away. It's just like the First Amendment. So understanding that and understanding the violence it does, understanding the amount of deaths that happen because of it in America, especially compared to the rest of the world, understanding that certain states that have less gun laws have more of a death rate than others, understanding that kids could get in trouble in terms of like misfiring, using it on themselves, unaliving themselves if they have it in their holding it, understanding that people who have potential can get it illegally, or people who are, you know, have mental illness problems can get a hold of it, or just people who are crazy in general and want to make a drastic change to ruin the country and cause anarchy can get a hold of it. There's always going to be bad actors when it comes to to certain rights that exist in America. So if we know this, if we know that it can do a lot of harm, if we know that we have a lot of harm that's already been happening in America, so we should all agree that we can always improve it. So that's how always shape things, that everything can constantly be improved when it comes to America because it's not a perfect country. We should go forward, not backwards in this make believe America that is apparently great that nobody can tell me what that year was. So as of right now, stuff like the background checks that was talked about, stuff like the red flag laws where we take it out of bad actors' hands, of course. Something like a national registry, just so you know, obviously
Mhm.
we ensure that public and private purchases are keeping track of, so bad actors don't get a hold of it. There are things that we could do that's not infringing people's rights, but also keeping each other safe, that I do think is very valuable. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we got for today's podcast episode and the open panel. Hope you guys enjoyed today's conversation. As always, they will be dropping every Thursday, 8 a.m. EST. Appreciate you guys coming on per usual. Another really good conversation. We got more things planned involved. I plan to do something else to even add another element to this. We'll see if that kind of goes through. But with that said, y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.